There are moments in life when you stare at the ceiling at night, and your mind refuses to rest. You replay conversations. You question your choices. You ask yourself, why do I keep doing this? Why can't I decide clearly? You think you're reflecting, but in truth, you're drowning in noise. Your thoughts chase each other in circles. You look for answers in the same storm that created the confusion. And the more you try to think your way out, the deeper you fall into the fog. It's strange, isn't it? You can solve other people's problems with perfect clarity, yet when it comes to your own life, everything feels blurred. You wake up heavy, already tired before the day begins. You check your phone, scroll through faces, opinions, distractions, and before you even take your first breath of awareness, your mind is already full. Full of everything except silence, full of everything except you. You keep moving from task to task, decision to decision, hoping that if you stay busy enough, the noise will fade. But it never does, because the noise isn't around you, it's within you. The truth is, you're not lost because life is unclear. You're lost because your mind is crowded. You've mistaken activity for clarity, speed for direction, thinking for understanding, and now every decision feels heavier than it should be. Maybe you've asked yourself, why can't I make a decision without doubting it later? Why do I keep changing my mind? Why do I feel like something's always missing, no matter what I choose? You're not alone in that feeling. Most people live there, between confusion and control, trapped in the silent struggle of their own thoughts. We live in an age where everyone speaks, but few think. Everyone decides, but few understand. We've built a world that worships movement, but forgets the value of stillness. There's a quiet truth hidden beneath all that chaos. Your mind doesn't become clear when you find all the answers. It becomes clear when you stop chasing them, and yet few dare to stop, because silence is uncomfortable. It feels like emptiness. It feels like losing control. But maybe that's exactly where real control begins. Soft pause. You don't need a new method to think better. You need a new relationship with your thoughts. Because clarity isn't found in thinking harder, it's found in thinking less. Somewhere deep down, you already know this. That's why you're here searching, listening, hoping that maybe there's a way to untangle the noise. To think clearly, to decide without fear, to finally be free of the overthinking that keeps you prisoner in your own head. And there is, but to find it, you must first look into the fog itself and see what you've been avoiding all along. Because behind every cloud of confusion lies the truth you've been too busy to face. You think you are free because you can go anywhere, say anything, do anything. But the truth is, you carry your prison with you in your own mind. You don't see it because the walls are made of thought. Invisible, silent, built over years of worry, fear, and self-doubt. Every time you replay the past, you lay another brick. Every time you imagine a future that hasn't yet come, you build another wall. And slowly, without even noticing, you lock yourself inside your own mind. You tell yourself you're just being careful. You call it thinking it through. But the more you think, the less you act. And the less you act, the heavier your thoughts become. That's the paradox of overthinking. It promises control, but delivers paralysis. You don't move forward because you're afraid of regret. You don't decide because you're afraid of being wrong. You don't speak your truth because you're afraid of judgment. And so you remain stuck in the endless loop between what if and if only. This is the inner prison the Stoics warned us about, not chains of iron, but chains of emotion and illusion. Epictetus once said, No man is free who is not master of himself, and mastery doesn't begin in strength, it begins in stillness. But stillness is the one thing we've forgotten how to live with. We fill every quiet moment with noise, music, screens, voices, notifications, because silence feels like exposure, like standing naked before your own mind. And yet, that's where truth lives. That's where wisdom begins. You see, the problem isn't that your mind is full of thoughts. It's that you believe every one of them. You believe the fear, you believe the doubt, you believe the story that says you're not ready yet. And the more you believe those thoughts, the more real they become. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. If your thoughts are heavy, your life will feel heavy. If your thoughts are chaotic, your world will feel chaotic. The prison of the mind doesn't need guards, because we guard ourselves. We protect our own limitations. We defend our comfort zones as if they were kingdoms. But freedom, true freedom, requires the courage to doubt your thoughts, to ask, is this true, or is this just my fear talking? The Stoics didn't silence their emotions, they mastered them. They didn't run from discomfort. They walked into it calmly, willingly, because they knew that comfort breeds confusion. So if you ever wonder why you can't think clearly, ask yourself this: when was the last time you were truly silent? When was the last time you questioned the voice in your head instead of obeying it? The prison door has no lock. It only needs you to stop guarding it, and maybe that's the beginning, not of thinking better, but of finally seeing clearly. Soft pause, light fades to black, because when you realize the prison was never real, you start walking out not with noise, but with awareness. Long before the world drowned itself in noise, long before every thought was shared and every silence was feared, there were men who faced the same chaos within and chose stillness over confusion. They called it philosophy, but it was never about theories or words. It was about survival of the soul. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled millions, yet wrote to himself each night, reminding his heart to stay calm, his mind to stay clear. He could command armies, but he could not command the future, and so he learned to command himself. He once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul if you allow it." That was his refuge, not palaces or power, but the quiet within his own thoughts. Seneca, too, saw the same truth. He said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." He knew the mind creates storms that never existed, and how easily we let those storms guide our lives. The Stoics lived in a world of uncertainty, wars, plagues, loss, betrayal, and yet their calmness wasn't weakness. It was control, not of others but of themselves. They didn't wait for peace, they created it. Because they understood what modern people forget. The quality of your decisions is determined by the quality of your mind. If the mind is cloudy, the path will always look uncertain. If the mind is ruled by emotion, every choice will feel like a battle. But when the mind is still, even the hardest decision becomes clear. They practiced this clarity through simplicity. When chaos arrived, they didn't ask, "Why me?" They asked, "What can I control right now?" That question alone separated the wise from the lost. Epictetus, born a slave, had nothing under his control. Not his body, not his circumstances, not even his freedom. And yet, he said, "You may fetter my leg, but not even Zeus can overcome my will." His chains could not imprison his mind, because He knew the difference between what was his and what was not, and that is the essence of Stoic clarity, to separate what you can control from what you wish you could. You cannot control how people treat you. You cannot control the past. You cannot control the world's noise. But you can control your response, your focus, your inner temperature. That is where peace begins and where wisdom lives. So when your mind feels clouded, when you stand between two choices and fear both outcomes, remember Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus. They were not gods. They were men flawed, hurt, uncertain, but they chose clarity over confusion. They learned that the mind is not your enemy, it's your instrument, and if you don't tune it, it will play only noise. Their words were not meant to decorate pages. They were meant to save lives. Because thinking clearly isn't about knowing more, it's about needing less fear, less noise, less illusion of control. And when you strip all of that away, what remains is not emptiness, but power, the quiet kind, the kind that does not shout, but simply knows. Soft pause, ambient wind, echo of ancient halls, because the truth the ancients lived by is the same truth we keep running from. The clearer your mind, the freer your life. You understand the truth, at least in theory. You've read the words, you've heard the wisdom. But when life tests you, when emotions rise like a flood and clarity drowns in noise, that's when philosophy stops being a comfort and becomes a fight. Because it's easy to sound wise in silence. It's easy to quote Marcus Aurelius when nothing is falling apart. But what happens when you're misunderstood? When things fall apart despite your effort? When the world refuses to go your way? That's when the battle begins. There's a moment every human faces, a war between the voice of reason and the pull of emotion. You want to stay calm, you want to think clearly, but anger burns, fear whispers, ego screams. And before you know it, you've spoken words you didn't mean, made choices you didn't want, and created pain you could have avoided. And then silence follows, heavy, regretful, cold. That silence, that's the sound of losing the inner war. Marcus wrote to himself, not to others, because he knew this war never ends. Every day, the mind tries to reclaim its throne from the heart. Every day, emotion tests logic. Every day, peace is something you choose, not something you find. He said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." In other words, stop reacting, start practicing. But we react because reaction feels alive. It feels powerful. It feels real. And yet, it's the fastest way to destroy your peace. Because reaction is fire, it burns fast, then leaves ashes. Reflection is water, quiet but lasting. Imagine this. You receive a message that triggers you. You want to reply instantly, defend yourself, prove your point. But if you pause just 5 seconds, you give wisdom a chance to speak. That pause is your weapon. That pause is Stoicism in action. Seneca said, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." He wasn't just talking about temper. He was talking about control. When you react instantly, you lose command. When you delay your reaction, you regain power. That's the battle between your need to feel right now and your ability to act with reason later. We all live in two worlds, the outer world that demands our attention and the inner world that requires our discipline. The outer world is chaos, noise, opinions, trends, validation, fear. The inner world is where decisions are made. And most people lose because they fight the wrong battle, trying to control the world, instead of themselves. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Think about that. You can have money, power, followers, but if one insult, one delay, or one failure can shake you, you're not free. You're a slave not to others, but to your emotions. This is the battlefield, the morning when you wake up tired but promised yourself discipline. The conversation where you want to prove your worth instead of staying silent. The failure that makes you want to give up instead of learning. The doubt that whispers you're not enough. Each is an enemy disguised as thought. Each is a test. And each time you resist, you become stronger, quieter, freer. But no one wins this battle once and for all. Because the war never ends, it only becomes quieter, more controlled, more deliberate. That's what Stoicism teaches, not the end of emotion, but the mastery of it. So when your mind screams, "Do something," and your spirit whispers, "Wait," choose the whisper. That's where wisdom lives, in the space between impulse and response. And when you master that space, you no longer need control over others. You already control the most powerful force in the world, yourself. Pause, soft echo of wind, sound of distant thunder fading, because peace isn't the absence of battle. It's learning how to fight calmly. There comes a day, or maybe a moment, when the chaos in your head becomes too heavy to carry. When you finally realize that no one is coming to save you. That all your searching, your striving, your comparing was just noise distracting you from the one truth you've avoided. You were never at war with the world. You were at war with yourself. You keep waiting for clarity, for some sign, some feeling, some perfect moment to decide, to act, to change, but clarity doesn't arrive. It's built, one quiet choice at a time. The turning point comes when you stop begging for peace and begin creating it. You've spent years trying to control outcomes, to fix people, to predict the future, to make the world move according to your plans. But the Stoics never promised control over the world. They promised control over the self, and when you understand that, really understand it, something in you shifts forever. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." It sounds simple, but it's everything, because most of your pain doesn't come from what happens. It comes from what you think about what happens. Your mind creates storms that reality never intended. You suffer more in imagination than in truth. One morning, you'll wake up, and instead of reaching for your phone, you'll sit still. You'll feel your thoughts racing, your body wanting distraction. And instead of feeding it, you'll watch it. That's when you'll see it clearly. Your thoughts are just weather. Some days stormy, some days calm, but the sky, your awareness, never changes. You were never your thoughts. You were the space behind them. That realization is freedom. You don't need the world to be calm for you to be calm. You just need to stop letting noise become your compass. Every time you overthink, you're trying to live tomorrow while standing in today. Every time you replay the past, you're trying to fix what no longer exists. No wonder your mind feels heavy. You've been carrying time itself. Let it go, not because it's easy, but because holding on is killing your clarity. Here's the truth most never learn. Peace isn't given to those who seek comfort. Peace is given to those who can stand in discomfort without escaping, to those who can be still in confusion, to those who can breathe through uncertainty, to those who can say, "I don't know what happens next, but I will meet it calmly." That is Stoicism, not detachment, but discipline. Not coldness, but control. Not emotionless, but emotionally mastered. You start realizing that every reaction is a decision. Every time you let anger win, you train chaos. Every time you stay composed, you train wisdom. And one day, what used to trigger you doesn't anymore. Not because you became indifferent, but because you learned your peace is too expensive to trade for someone else's noise. That's the moment it clicks, the turning point. You stop trying to be right and start trying to be calm. You stop needing approval and start needing alignment. You stop chasing control and start embodying strength. You realize now it was never about fixing everything. It was about seeing everything without being broken by it. And in that moment of stillness, you understand the silent truth the Stoics lived by. You don't need to escape life to find peace. You just need to stop letting your mind make it harder than it is. That's the shift. That's the awakening. That's the point when philosophy stops being a theory and becomes your way of being. Soft tone, reflective pause. This is the beginning of mastery. Not of others, but of yourself. Because once you learn to think clearly, no one can manipulate you with fear. Once you learn to see calmly, no chaos can blind you. And once you learn to choose peace, you become unshakable. You've understood the storm. You've seen the noise. You've found stillness in the middle of confusion. Now, the question is simple. How do you live this way every day? Because understanding Stoicism isn't enough. Reading the words of Marcus Aurelius doesn't make you calm. Listening to Seneca doesn't make you wise. Only practice does that. So, let's begin with something small. When you wake up before the world touches you, take one breath. Not just any breath, a conscious one. It's not a ritual, it's a reminder. That breath is you reclaiming your awareness before chaos does. It's you saying, I will choose how I meet this day. No matter what happens next, you already began with intention, and that changes everything. Throughout the day, the Stoic applies the pause. When emotion rises, pause. When anger hits, pause. When someone says something that feels like an attack, pause. That small silence between reaction and response is where wisdom lives. You don't need to erase emotions. You need to observe them, to feel anger but not become it, to feel fear but not obey it, to feel doubt but still move forward. That's control. That's real freedom. The modern world rewards impulsive action, but the Stoic mind values deliberate action. Before you act, ask, is this within my control? If yes, take disciplined action. If no, accept it and move forward anyway. This single question saves you from 1,000 unnecessary battles. It separates your peace from other people's chaos. The Stoic doesn't chase what is uncertain, they prepare for it. They don't wish for an easy life, they train for a resilient one. Seneca said, set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest fare and rough clothing, and say to yourself, is this what I feared? He was teaching voluntary discomfort, because every time you face a little discomfort willingly, you weaken fear's control over you. You become harder to disturb, harder to manipulate, harder to break. The Stoic understands that clarity isn't just thinking less, it's thinking right. It's asking, what can I learn from this moment? Instead of why is this happening to me? It's turning pain into a teacher, failure into feedback, silence into strength. When you stop labeling moments as good or bad and start labeling them as necessary, you stop being a victim of life and start becoming a student of it. Every evening, the Stoic reflects. Sit down, no distractions, no noise. Ask yourself, what did I do well today? What could I have done better? What did I allow to disturb my peace? Don't judge yourself, observe yourself, because awareness isn't guilt, it's growth. And each night, as you write, you're building a fortress inside your mind, brick by brick of self-respect, discipline, and calm. Understand this, the Stoic doesn't live without emotion. They live without enslavement to emotion. They feel everything deeply, but nothing owns them. Because they know that nothing external can truly harm the person who has mastered their internal world. That's the real strength, not dominance, not status, but the quiet confidence of self-control. So, when life throws chaos your way, and it will, remember, you've already trained for this. You've prepared your mind. You've built stillness as your shield. When someone insults you, smile. When plans fall apart, adapt. When uncertainty arrives, welcome it, because a Stoic doesn't seek comfort. A Stoic seeks clarity, and from clarity comes unshakable calm. Soft, cinematic tone in the end. Stoicism is not about knowing quotes. It's about living them. It's about the calm walk through the fire, not because you're fearless, but because you finally understand. The fire was never your enemy. Your panic was, so breathe, return to stillness, and remember, you don't control everything, you only control yourself. And that is enough. If this message spoke to you, if you felt even a spark of calm or strength, remember, wisdom only works if you live it. So take a deep breath and act. Subscribe to Stoic Mode On for more calm, powerful, and disciplined reflections every week. Each video is a reminder that you are stronger than you think, and peace is always within reach. The noise has quieted. The confusion that once ruled your mornings now feels distant. You sit alone, no music, no notifications, no voices, just the soft sound of your own breathing. For the first time in a long while, you're not running from your thoughts. You're observing them. They rise. They fade, and you realize you were never your thoughts. You were the one watching them. That's the secret the Stoics understood. You can't stop your mind from speaking, but you can stop believing everything it says. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That line, when truly lived, changes the architecture of your entire existence. Because every moment you've suffered more than necessary came from forgetting that truth, from trying to control what was never yours to command. You remember the times you argued endlessly, trying to make someone understand you. You remember the hours wasted replaying old conversations, imagining different outcomes. You remember the pain of wanting things to stay the same when life clearly wanted to change. And now, sitting here, you see it with quiet clarity. The chaos wasn't around you. It was within you. You were never fighting the world. You were fighting your own resistance to it. This is the essence of clear thinking. It's not about being emotionless. It's about seeing reality as it is, not as your fears or desires want it to be. It's about asking, what is actually happening right now? What part of this is under my control? And most importantly, what is the most virtuous response I can give? Once you start asking those questions, confusion turns into clarity, anger turns into understanding, and fear turns into strategy. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer rush, you move with purpose. You no longer seek approval, you respect your own judgment. That's what Seneca meant when he said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself, Adversity is not a curse. It's a test, a mirror, a teacher, and once you stop running from discomfort, you realize how much of your mind was built on fear, fear of pain, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. But when you let those fears dissolve, you become untouchable. Look around you. Nothing has changed. The world is still unpredictable, unfair, chaotic. But you have changed, and that changes everything. You walk differently now, not faster, not louder, but calmer. You listen before you speak. You act before you complain. You observe before you react. And in that silence, you discover the one thing everyone's searching for. Peace that doesn't depend on anything. It's strange, when you finally stop trying to control everything, you gain control over yourself. When you stop needing people to understand you, you understand yourself. When you stop running from uncertainty, you realize it was never chasing you. You were just afraid to stand still. So now, you rise not to escape life, but to live it with awareness. You start seeing every problem as a practice, every conflict as a lesson, every day as a chance to choose clarity again. And when doubt tries to whisper, when anxiety knocks at the door, you greet it with calm eyes and a steady breath. Because you've learned, it's not what happens to you that defines your peace, it's how you meet it. The reflection ends not with noise, but with understanding. This calm you feel isn't luck. It's the natural state that appears when the storm inside finally stops fighting itself. And in that quiet, you realize something profound. You were never lost. You were just distracted. Peace wasn't hiding. You were. The morning sun rises, and its light spills quietly over the world. Nothing grand, nothing loud. Just warmth touching stone. You stand there, calm, awake, not chasing, not escaping, simply present. And in that presence, you understand something so simple that it almost feels like a whisper from eternity. You were never meant to control the storm. You were meant to control yourself within it. All this time you thought clarity was about perfection, making every choice flawlessly, never doubting, never hesitating. But now you see, clear thinking isn't about always being right. It's about being calm enough to see things as they are. Because truth doesn't shout. It doesn't compete for your attention. It waits in the silence after reaction, in the space between thought and response. That's where wisdom lives. That's where you live when you stop being a prisoner of noise. Epictetus said, "Circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him to himself." And now you understand that. Every moment of chaos, every argument, every loss, every delay, they weren't punishments. They were mirrors, mirrors showing what still needed to be mastered, mirrors reflecting how far you've come. You remember who you were when this story began, confused, reactive, uncertain. You were searching for control in the world because you hadn't yet found control within yourself. But today, that version of you finally exhales. You've learned to pause before reacting, to breathe before speaking, to understand before deciding, and that single pause, that sacred space between thought and action, is where strength lies. That's where Stoicism begins. The world hasn't changed, but your vision has. You see that peace isn't a place. It's a practice. Every day, every choice, every breath. To think clearly is to live simply. To act wisely is to live freely. And to live freely is to no longer need the world to behave before you do. Now you walk forward, not as someone who has figured it all out, but as someone who has found himself. Your mind is steady, your decisions deliberate, your peace unshakable, because when the mind becomes still, everything else falls into place. And so, you look once more at the rising sun, and the words form in your mind words that feel ancient, yet completely your own. Peace is not found, it's chosen. Control your mind, or it will control you. See clearly, live calmly, act with purpose. That is the Stoic way. That is clarity, that is freedom. If this message reached you, you were meant to hear it. Remember, wisdom is useless unless lived. So don't just listen, apply it, every single day. This is Stoic mode on, where philosophy becomes strength, and silence becomes power. Now go and protect your peace.